His attorney leaned forward and whispered 5 quiet words. Just 5. And in that instant, Marcus Hale's confident smile vanished. The color drained from his face as if someone had switched off a light inside him. His hands began to tremble, the divorce papers shaking between his fingers. The same papers he had rushed to sign because he believed he had already won. Across the courtroom in Chicago, Illinois, I watched realization slowly catch up to him. For the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand that moment, you need to know how we got there. How a woman everyone thought was broken, discarded, and too exhausted to fight had actually been waiting patiently for the right ending. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 35 years old, and until recently I was married to Marcus Hale, a rising real estate developer known across Chicago for his success, his confidence, and his seemingly perfect life. 15 years of marriage. Long enough to build a family. Long enough to build a business. And apparently long enough for a man to believe everything belonged to him. When Marcus asked for a divorce, he didn't hesitate. He wanted the house, the company, the cars, every investment, everything. He even told me I could keep our son, as if custody were a consolation prize. Everyone thought I had lost. My friends pitied me. His family celebrated. Even my lawyer believed I was surrendering too easily. What no one understood was that Marcus wasn't taking my life away from me. He was taking something else entirely, because the empire he was so desperate to claim wasn't built on wealth. It was built on debt. And the moment he signed those papers, he didn't win the divorce. He inherited the collapse. People think marriages end with explosions, a shouting match, a betrayal discovered too late, a dramatic moment where everything finally breaks. Mine didn't end like that. My marriage ended quietly, long before Marcus Hale ever said the word divorce. It ended in moments so small no one else would have noticed them. The first time he stopped asking my opinion about business decisions. The first time he corrected me in front of investors, laughing afterward like it was harmless teasing. The first time he introduced me at an industry event, not as his partner, not as the woman who helped build his company, but simply as my wife. 2 words, simple ones. But somehow they erased years of work. When Marcus and I met, things felt very different. I was 17, freshly graduated early, and desperate to leave my parents' cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago. Independence mattered more to me than comfort. I took a job as a file clerk at Brennan and Lowe Legal Services, earning barely enough to cover rent but feeling proud every payday. By 18, I had worked my way into a legal assistant position. I learned contracts, disclosures, financial filings, the invisible framework that holds businesses together. I learned how success is documented and how failure hides inside paperwork long before anyone notices. Marcus walked into my life when he was 24, confident, ambitious, charming in a way that made people believe his future was already guaranteed. He talked about real estate constantly. Redevelopment projects, investment opportunities, neighborhoods he planned to transform. He spoke about success like it was inevitable. I helped him review paperwork for one of his earliest property deals. That was our first real conversation. Romantic in an unexpected way. We married when I was 19. Too young, people later said. But at the time, it felt like partnership. 2 people building something together from nothing. Our son, Noah, was born a year later. Life became busy quickly. I worked part-time while raising him, quietly contributing to Marcus's growing business whenever he needed help. My grandmother had always repeated one rule throughout my childhood. A woman should always have something of her own. Not secret money, just security. When Marcus's company finally began expanding, he asked me to leave my job and work with him full-time. "I trust you more than anyone," he said. So I stepped in completely. Bookkeeping, scheduling contractors, managing client communications, coordinating staging for new properties, late-night spreadsheets after Noah fell asleep beside me at the dining table. Marcus became the face of Hale Development Group. I became everything behind it. For 11 years, I watched his reputation grow. Awards appeared on office shelves. Magazine features praised his vision. Investors shook his hand and congratulated him on his success. No one ever asked who balanced the accounts or solved crises before they became visible. I told myself recognition didn't matter. We were a team. At least, that's what I believed. Success changed him slowly. Or maybe success simply removed the need for him to pretend. He started coming home later. Business dinners became overnight trips. Conferences multiplied. Phone calls moved into private rooms. When I asked questions, he sighed like I was creating problems. "You don't understand the pressure," he would say. Pressure. Meanwhile, I handled payroll, permits, and household responsibilities while helping Noah with schoolwork and keeping everything running smoothly. Somehow I was the one lacking ambition. That word stayed with me. One night at a company gala downtown, Marcus stood surrounded by investors, glass raised as he spoke proudly. "This company is my life," he said. "Not ours. His." I smiled politely while something inside me shifted, small but permanent. I realized I had slowly disappeared from my own story. 3 months before the divorce, the distance between us became impossible to ignore. Passwords changed. Phones turned face down. Cologne I hadn't bought appeared on his dresser. Still, I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, because something else had already started bothering me more. The numbers. Small inconsistencies inside company accounts. Transfers that didn't match invoices. Payments routed through unfamiliar entities. At first, I assumed it was a bookkeeping oversight. But the pattern repeated. Late one Tuesday night after Noah went to bed and Marcus texted that he was working late, I opened the financial system and began reviewing transactions line by line. Hours passed unnoticed. The house was silent except for the faint hum of appliances. And sometime close to 3 a.m, I realized something was terribly wrong. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything. Because the marriage I thought I was losing had already been standing on something ready to collapse. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Fatigue can make ordinary details look suspicious. After hours staring at spreadsheets, numbers blur together, patterns appear where none exist. I almost closed the laptop and went to bed. Almost. But something about the transfer bothered me. $48,000 had moved out of one of our operating accounts into a holding account I didn't recognize. No vendor attached, no project reference, no invoice uploaded into the system. Marcus hated incomplete documentation. He used to lecture employees about accountability, about how every dollar needed a purpose. Yet, here it was, money moving quietly without explanation. I checked the previous month. Then the month before that, the same account appeared again. Different amounts. Same destination. A slow leak. My pulse began to quicken. For 11 years, I had managed the financial rhythm of Hale Development Group. I knew how money flowed through our projects, permits, contractors, materials, investor distributions. This pattern didn't belong to any legitimate expense. I leaned closer to the screen and started tracing the account history. One transfer led to another, then another. By the time the clock read 3:12 a.m., my hands were shaking. The house, the one Marcus loved showing off, carried not one mortgage but 3. The original loan I knew about, a second refinance completed years earlier, and a third loan taken quietly against the property more recently. Total debt far exceeded the home's value. We weren't wealthy homeowners. We were buried. I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers, waiting for panic. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I opened the business accounts next. That was worse. Lines of credit maxed out. Vendor payments delayed repeatedly. Tax notices flagged but unresolved. Equipment financed instead of owned. The thriving company Marcus bragged about at every networking event was surviving entirely on borrowed money. Success wasn't funding expansion. Debt was. I continued digging. Luxury purchases charged through business accounts. Travel expenses unrelated to projects, monthly payments tied to an apartment address I didn't recognize. The realization came slowly but unmistakably. There wasn't just financial risk. There was another life I knew nothing about. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. Anger tried to rise, but logic pushed it aside. Confronting Marcus now would accomplish nothing. I knew how persuasive he could be. He would explain everything away, make the situation sound temporary, convince me I misunderstood. And if he realized I knew the truth, he might start protecting himself financially, including from me. That thought changed everything. I opened my personal banking app. My retirement account from my years at the law firm remained untouched. separate, safe. Then I checked the inheritance my grandmother had left me. Funds I had never mixed with marital finances, exactly as she had instructed. A woman should always have something of her own. For the first time, I understood the deeper meaning behind those words. Protection, not secrecy. Dawn light began creeping through the kitchen windows as birds started chirping outside. The world felt ordinary again, completely disconnected from the reality sitting on my screen. A text message appeared from Marcus. Running late. Big investor meeting. Don't wait up. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed the response he expected. Good luck. I'm proud of you. Sending that message felt like crossing an invisible line, because instead of exposing the truth, I chose silence. From that moment forward, I stopped thinking like a wife trying to save her marriage. I started thinking like someone preparing for impact. I shut the laptop carefully and cleaned the kitchen before Noah woke up, moving through familiar routines while my mind worked quietly beneath the surface. People believe strength looks loud, but sometimes strength looks like patience, like paying attention while everyone else stops looking. And sometimes the most important decisions happen in silence, the kind you only understand if you stay long enough to hear the whole story unfold. The hardest part wasn't discovering the truth. It was pretending nothing had changed. The next morning, Marcus kissed Noah goodbye, grabbed his coffee, and rushed out the door like always. He smiled at me casually, completely unaware that the ground beneath our lives had already shifted. I watched him leave and realized something unsettling. He truly believed everything was under control. For the next few weeks, I behaved exactly the same. Breakfast at 7. Emails answered before noon, contractor schedules organized, client calls handled smoothly. Routine became my disguise. Inside, though, I was paying attention to everything. Marcus started coming home later than usual. His explanations sounded polished but repetitive. Networking dinners, investor meetings, last-minute negotiations. His phone rarely left his hand anymore, and when messages arrived, he angled the screen away instinctively. I didn't ask questions. Silence made him comfortable. Comfort made him careless. Every evening after Noah went to bed, I returned to the financial records. Slowly, patiently, I followed the trail of transactions Marcus assumed no one else reviewed anymore. Patterns emerged. Loans taken to cover earlier loans. Credit extensions used to maintain appearances. Projects announced publicly before funding actually existed. Marcus wasn't stealing money. He was surviving month to month. The company looked successful from the outside because debt kept it moving forward. Investors saw expansion. Banks saw leverage. Marcus saw temporary pressure he believed he could outrun. But numbers don't share optimism. Numbers only record reality. One afternoon, I overheard him speaking on the phone in his office. "I just need another extension," he said quietly. "The next project will fix everything." I froze in the hallway. The next project. There was always another one. That was when I understood something important. Marcus didn't think he was failing. He believed success was just one deal away. Hope can be more dangerous than dishonesty. That evening, while organizing paperwork, I opened a drawer he rarely used. Inside were unopened envelopes stamped with urgent notices, late payment warnings, refinancing confirmations, bank correspondence. I photographed each one carefully before placing them back exactly as I found them. Not revenge. Documentation. Days passed, then weeks. I became better at acting normal. At industry events, I stood beside Marcus smiling while people praised his achievements. Investors congratulated him on growth I now knew was funded almost entirely by borrowed money. Sometimes I wondered how many people sensed the truth but chose not to look too closely. Success makes people comfortable. Questions make them nervous. One night after a gala downtown, Marcus introduced me to a group of developers. "This is Olivia," he said casually. "She keeps everything running at home so I can focus on business. At home." The words landed harder than he intended. For 11 years, I had balanced accounts, negotiated timelines, and solved financial crises behind the scenes. Yet my contribution had been reduced to domestic support. I smiled anyway, because in that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. I stopped trying to be seen. Being underestimated suddenly felt useful. On the drive home, Marcus barely spoke. His phone lit up repeatedly, messages arriving faster than he could answer them. I watched city lights pass outside the window and felt an unexpected calm. Fear was fading. Clarity was replacing it. If the business collapsed, and eventually it would, creditors would come after everything tied to Marcus's name, and everything tied to our marriage, unless I prepared. The next morning, I called someone I trusted completely. My Uncle David, a retired accountant who had spent decades helping clients untangle financial disasters. We met quietly at a small cafe far from Marcus's office. I explained only the facts: mortgages, loans, irregular transfers. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back and said one sentence that changed how I saw everything. "You're not looking at wealth," he said gently. "You're looking at liability." Hearing it aloud made the situation real in a way spreadsheets never could. "What should I do?" I asked. He studied me carefully. "First," he said, "you stop thinking like a spouse." A pause. "And start thinking like someone who might need proof." That was the moment preparation truly began. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just one careful decision at a time. Decisions no one notices until the consequences finally arrive. After meeting my Uncle David, everything felt sharper. Before, I had been reacting emotionally, trying to understand what was happening to my marriage, trying to explain Marcus's behavior in ways that didn't hurt as much. Now I began looking at the situation structurally, like a problem that needed solving. David didn't dramatize anything. He reviewed the financial summaries I brought him with calm efficiency, occasionally circling numbers or making small notes in the margins. When he finished, he closed the folder gently. "You still have time," he said. "Time for what?" "To separate what legally belongs to you from what's about to fall apart." The words felt heavy but also grounding. He explained how debt works when tied to marital assets. Creditors don't care who created the problem. They pursue whoever is legally connected to it. If Marcus's business failed, anything jointly owned could be pulled into the collapse, including me, including Noah's future. That realization removed the last piece of denial I had been holding on to. Saving the marriage was no longer the priority. Protection was. The following week, David introduced me to an estate attorney he trusted. I scheduled the meeting during hours Marcus believed I was running errands for the house. Walking into that office felt strange, almost secretive, until the attorney reviewed my situation and smiled reassuringly. "You're not hiding money," she explained. "You're preserving separate property. That's completely legal." There's a difference between secrecy and responsibility. I learned that quickly. My retirement savings from my early legal career had never been merged into our joint accounts. My grandmother's inheritance had remained untouched, exactly as she instructed years ago. Separate, documented, protected, for now. Over several meetings, we created an irrevocable trust for Noah. The process was meticulous. Every transfer recorded properly, every legal detail verified. Once completed, those funds would exist solely for his future. Education, housing, emergencies, inaccessible to either Marcus or me for personal use. When I signed the final paperwork, relief washed over me so suddenly I nearly cried. For the first time since discovering the debt, something felt safe. Meanwhile, life at home continued normally. Marcus became more distracted with each passing week. He spent evenings locked in his office, speaking in hushed tones during phone calls. His patience shortened, especially when financial questions arose. One afternoon, I casually mentioned a delayed contractor payment. He snapped immediately. "I told you not to worry about that," he said sharply. "Just handle your part." I nodded and apologized. Inside, I simply noted how pressure was affecting him. Stress makes people careless, and carelessness leaves evidence. I began documenting everything. Mortgage statements copied and stored outside the house. Loan agreements photographed. Bank notices scanned and saved onto an encrypted drive David helped me set up. Duplicates went to my sister's apartment. Another set into a safe deposit box. At first, the process felt excessive. Then I imagined trying to explain the truth later without proof, and continued. Weeks passed. I became very good at acting unchanged. I attended dinners beside Marcus, smiling politely while investors praised his success. I hosted gatherings in a house I now knew we didn't truly own. I listened as he spoke confidently about expansion plans funded entirely through borrowed money. Sometimes I wondered if he believed his own story. or if pretending had simply become easier than admitting fear. The biggest change, though, was internal. I stopped reacting emotionally. His late nights no longer hurt the same way. His secrecy no longer confused me. Distance grew quietly between us, invisible but undeniable. Marcus noticed eventually. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening. "Just tired," I replied. He accepted the answer immediately, because it fit the version of me he preferred. Supportive, exhausted, harmless, underestimated. And being underestimated turned out to be the safest place I could be. Because while Marcus believed he was still steering our future, I was already preparing for the moment when reality would finally catch up to him, and when everything he thought he owned would reveal its true cost. There's a moment when pain stops feeling sharp. It doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. After weeks of preparation, something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for Marcus to notice me again. I stopped hoping conversations would return to what they used to be. Instead, I began observing our life the way an outsider might. And from that distance, everything became clearer. Marcus wasn't trying to hurt me intentionally. He had simply moved on emotionally long before saying it out loud. His attention belonged somewhere else now. Her name was Lena Brooks. She worked in marketing for Hale Development Group. Younger, confident, effortlessly polished. At first, she appeared only in work conversations. Then her name came up more frequently. Then she started attending events where spouses usually stood beside their partners. Eventually, she stopped pretending to be just an employee. I noticed the small details first. Marcus checking his reflection before leaving for meetings. New shirts I hadn't bought. Longer gym sessions. Phone calls taken outside. The signs weren't dramatic. They were ordinary enough that anyone determined not to see them could ignore them easily. I didn't ignore them. But I also didn't confront him. Silence became strategy. The less I reacted, the more relaxed he became. Documents remained open on his desk. Mail piled up unopened. Financial stress made him distracted, and distraction made him careless. One evening, he mentioned traveling more frequently. "Expansion opportunities," he said casually. I nodded, asking only whether he'd be home for Noah's school event later that week. He hesitated before answering. "I'll try." That hesitation told me more than any confession could. Noah noticed changes too. Kids always do. "Dad's busy a lot lately," he said quietly while finishing homework at the kitchen counter. "He's working hard," I answered gently. Noah nodded, but uncertainty lingered in his expression. Watching that hurt more than anything Marcus had done to me. It strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about stability, making sure Noah wouldn't be pulled into whatever collapse was coming. Meanwhile, Marcus grew increasingly confident at home. My lack of resistance reassured him. He stopped hiding messages, stopped explaining late nights, stopped pretending everything was normal. One evening, Lena came by the house to drop off project materials. She walked through the kitchen comfortably, smiling politely at me as if we were acquaintances, rather than strangers connected by betrayal. I greeted her calmly. Politeness unsettled people more than anger ever could. After she left, Marcus watched me carefully, almost waiting for confrontation. None came. Instead, I asked if he wanted dinner. Relief crossed his face so quickly it was almost invisible. That was when I understood fully. He expected conflict. Without it, he stopped being cautious. And without caution, truth surfaces faster. Over the following weeks, I gathered the final pieces of documentation. Updated loan balances. Personal guarantees signed solely under Marcus's name. Renewed credit extensions keeping projects alive artificially. Every file confirmed the same reality. The company existed on borrowed time. From the outside, success still looked convincing. Inside, everything depended on confidence continuing just a little longer. Late one night, while organizing files, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt detached, almost peaceful. Because once you understand the outcome clearly, fear loses its power. Marcus believed he was moving toward freedom. A new relationship, a new life, a clean break. He didn't realize he was moving toward responsibility. And responsibility was already waiting for him. A few days later, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, unusually serious. "I think we've grown apart," he said carefully. The conversation I had anticipated for months had finally arrived. I lowered my eyes slightly, letting silence stretch. "If that's how you feel," I said softly. Relief filled his expression. The decision had already been made long before he spoke it aloud. That night, after he fell asleep, I reviewed my files one last time. 3 years of preparation nearly complete. Every document secured. Every protection in place. I closed the folder and turned off the light. Marcus believed the hardest part was ending the marriage. He had no idea the real consequences hadn't even begun yet. The conversation happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. No warning, no argument leading up to it. Just silence settling into the house like it already knew what was coming. I was finishing dinner when Marcus walked in, loosened his tie, and set his keys carefully on the counter. He didn't kiss me hello. He didn't ask about Noah's Day. Instead, he said, "We need to talk." 3 words that never mean anything good. I turned off the stove and sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same place where we had once planned vacations, argued about paint colors, and helped Noah with school projects. Marcus folded his hands together like he was preparing for a meeting. "I think we should get divorced." The words landed softly, almost rehearsed. I waited for emotion to follow. Regret, hesitation, something human. Nothing came. "We've grown apart," he continued calmly. "I want something different now. Different." I already knew what that meant. "Is there someone else?" I asked. He paused just long enough to confirm the answer without saying it directly. "That's not the point." Which meant yes. Strangely, I didn't feel shock. Months of preparation had quietly drained surprise from moments like this. "What happens now?" I asked. Marcus visibly relaxed, as if the hardest part was already over. "I've spoken to a lawyer," he said. "We can keep this simple if we're reasonable." Already prepared. Of course he was. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were preliminary settlement terms neatly organized. I read them slowly, keeping my expression neutral even as each line confirmed exactly what I expected. He wanted the house, the company, the vehicles, all investments, everything connected to Hale Development Group. "You'll keep primary custody of Noah," he added almost generously. The words hurt more than anything else, as if our son were separate from the assets column. "And me?" I asked quietly. Marcus hesitated before answering. "I'll provide a settlement so you can start over somewhere else." Somewhere else. Not here. Not in the home I had helped build. I lowered my gaze slightly, letting my shoulders sink the way a defeated person's might. Inside, my thoughts remained perfectly clear. He was doing exactly what I had anticipated, claiming every asset, accepting every liability. Though he didn't yet understand that part. "I don't want this to get ugly," he added quickly. "For Noah's sake." I almost smiled at that. Ugly would have required resistance. Instead, I nodded slowly. "If that's what you want," I said softly. Relief crossed his face instantly. He had expected tears, maybe anger. Instead, he saw surrender, and surrender made him careless. Within days, changes followed. I moved into the guest room. Joint accounts were restricted. My credit card stopped working without warning. "We need financial separation," Marcus explained calmly. Soon after, Lena began appearing openly at the house. No more secrecy. She walked through the kitchen comfortably, smiling politely as if I were already gone. I played my role perfectly, quiet, tired, cooperative. Marcus mistook silence for weakness. What he didn't realize was that every step he took toward claiming everything moved him closer to owning something else entirely. Responsibility. One evening, Noah sat beside me on the couch after Marcus left for dinner. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I smiled gently. "I will be." And I meant it, because the hardest part, waiting for Marcus to make the decision himself, was finally over. He believed he was ending a chapter. In reality, he had just stepped into the final act of a story that had begun the night I first discovered the truth hidden inside his financial records. Funny thing about choices, sometimes the ones that feel like freedom at the time quietly become the moments that change everything. If you've ever seen a story unfold slowly, you already know patience tells the real ending. Humiliation rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It comes in small adjustments, changes that seem temporary until you realize nothing is going back to the way it was. After Marcus announced the divorce, the house stopped feeling like home almost immediately. The master bedroom became his. The guest room became mine. There was no discussion about it. One evening, my clothes were simply moved, half folded into laundry baskets near the hallway. Marcus spoke about it casually, as if rearranging furniture. "It'll make things less complicated," he said. Less complicated for him. I nodded and carried the baskets upstairs myself. The distance between us grew quickly after that. Conversations became logistical. Schedules, bills, Noah's school events. Marcus spoke politely but without warmth, like we were business partners dissolving a contract. Within a week, financial separation began. My debit card declined at a grocery store checkout. I stood there embarrassed while the cashier tried again. Still declined. I paid in cash and drove home quietly, already knowing what had happened. Marcus confirmed it later that evening. "I separated the accounts," he explained. "It's cleaner this way." Cleaner. The word lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. Soon after, he suggested I start looking for another place to live. "It'll be easier once everything's finalized," he said carefully. Easier? For whom? I agreed without argument. Resistance would only slow things down. Lena's presence became constant. At first, she visited briefly, dropping off files or discussing marketing plans. Then she stayed longer. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and found her rearranging cabinets, humming softly while placing dishes where she preferred them. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "Marcus said you wouldn't mind." Marcus said. Not Marcus and I. Just Marcus. I smiled politely and grabbed my coat. Anger would have ruined months of patience. A few days later, Marcus's mother, Elaine Hale, arrived to help organize. She walked through the house, inspecting everything with quiet satisfaction. "You'll be fine," she told me gently, though her tone carried judgment beneath sympathy. Sometimes people grow in different directions. She helped pack my belongings, though help mostly meant deciding what stayed. Jewelry Marcus had purchased remained. Furniture remained. Decor remained. "Marital property," she explained. My clothes went into large trash bags. Not boxes. Trash bags. I carried them outside one by one, neighbors politely pretending not to notice. That was the only moment I nearly cried. Not because I was losing the house, because of how easily I had been erased from it. But even then I reminded myself this was temporary. Marcus believed he was removing me from his life. In reality, he was removing the only person who understood the structure holding his world together. The apartment Noah and I found was small. 2 bedrooms, narrow hallway, a kitchen barely large enough for both of us to stand comfortably. No marble counters, no high ceilings, just simplicity. Noah tried to sound cheerful while helping unpack. "It's kind of cozy," he said. I smiled, grateful for his kindness. That first night felt strange. The silence wasn't heavy like before. It was honest. No pretending, no performance. Across town, Marcus posted photos online. "New beginnings," one caption read beneath a picture of him and Lena standing in front of the house. Friends congratulated him. His mother commented proudly. Everyone believed he had won. I watched quietly, feeling neither anger nor jealousy, because the final agreement still hadn't been signed. And until signatures existed, the story wasn't finished. Marcus slept peacefully in a house drowning in debt he didn't yet understand. While in my small apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and secondhand furniture, I felt something unexpected settle inside me. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't living inside an illusion. I turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching city traffic move below, waiting, not for revenge, for timing. By the time mediation began, Marcus looked happier than he had in months. Confidence suited him again. The tension I had watched slowly build over the past year seemed to vanish, now that he believed the future was firmly under his control. He walked into the mediation office smiling, greeting everyone like this was simply another successful negotiation. Maybe to him it was. The conference room sat on the 20th floor overlooking downtown Chicago. Glass walls, neutral decor, carefully arranged chairs, meant to encourage cooperation instead of conflict. I arrived with my attorney, Rachel Kim, 10 minutes early. Rachel had reviewed every document I collected over the past 3 years. She understood the strategy completely, though she had asked me more than once if I was certain. "You're walking away from a lot," she had warned. Only on paper, I thought. Marcus entered shortly after with his lawyer, Thomas Reed, carrying himself like a man about to finalize a victory. Lena waited outside in the lobby, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing toward the conference room doors. The mediator began with standard explanations: fairness, transparency, voluntary agreement. Marcus barely waited for the introduction to finish. "I'd like to keep things simple," he said confidently. "I'll assume full ownership of the house and the company. That makes division easier." Easier. He spoke as if he were doing everyone a favor. Rachel glanced toward me, silently giving me space to object. I didn't. "I just want this finished peacefully," I said softly. The mediator paused, clearly surprised. Long marriages rarely ended without disputes over property. Most spouses fought aggressively for shared assets. Marcus relaxed visibly. I requested only a modest settlement, personal belongings, and shared custody of Noah. Nothing more. Thomas Reed raised an eyebrow, clearly confused, but Marcus accepted immediately. "Fair enough," he said quickly. "Too quickly." The mediator confirmed again. "Mrs. Carter, you understand you are relinquishing claim to significant marital assets?" "Yes," I answered. "The business means everything to him." Marcus looked at me with something almost like sympathy, the expression people wear when they believe they are witnessing surrender. Rachel quietly slid additional documents into the agreement package. The liability disclosures, every mortgage, every loan, every personal guarantee attached to the assets Marcus insisted on keeping. Legal language doesn't sound dramatic. It doesn't accuse or warn. It simply states facts. Ownership includes responsibility. Assets and liabilities travel together. Nothing hidden. Nothing altered. During a short break, Thomas pulled Marcus aside. I watched them through the glass wall as Thomas spoke seriously, pointing at sections of the paperwork. Marcus laughed and shook his head. "I built this company," he said confidently. "I know what it's worth." Confidence can silence caution faster than ignorance ever could. When mediation resumed, Marcus signed preliminary agreements without hesitation. Each signature tightened the outcome he believed he wanted. Outside afterward, Lena hugged him excitedly. "Almost done," she said. Marcus smiled, already celebrating. That evening, Noah and I ate dinner at the small kitchen table in our apartment. "Are you really okay letting Dad keep everything?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. "What do you think?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "I think something doesn't add up." I squeezed his hand. "Sometimes things take time to make sense." He nodded slowly, accepting that answer. Back at the house, Marcus posted another photo online. Champagne glasses raised, captions about fresh starts and new chapters. Friends congratulated him again. No one congratulates patience. From the outside, patience looks like defeat. Behind the scenes, Rachel finalized the legal structure carefully, ensuring every liability attached exactly where it belonged. Nothing rushed, nothing unclear. 2 weeks later, the court scheduled the final hearing. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. Marcus believed he was about to collect everything he had worked for. I knew he was about to accept it, and the difference between those two things was about to change both our lives forever. The morning of the hearing felt strangely ordinary. No dramatic tension, no sleepless panic, just quiet certainty. I woke early in the small apartment, sunlight barely touching the edges of the curtains. Noah was still asleep, textbooks scattered across the coffee table where he had studied late into the night. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching him breathe steadily. Everything I had done, every document saved, every silence endured, had been for this: stability. I dressed simply. A navy dress, low heels, hair pulled back neatly. No jewelry except my grandmother's small silver ring. I wanted to look exactly how everyone expected me to look. Tired, unthreatening, done fighting. Rachel picked me up at 8:30. During the drive downtown, neither of us spoke much. She reviewed notes quietly while traffic moved slowly through morning commuters. "You ready?" she finally asked. "I've been ready for a long time," I answered. Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood near the entrance talking confidently with Thomas Reed. He wore one of his best suits, the charcoal one we had chosen together years earlier for an investor presentation. He looked successful, relaxed, certain. Lena waited across the street holding coffee, smiling when Marcus kissed her cheek before walking inside. To her, this was probably just another step toward their new life. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. People spoke in hushed voices while clerks organized files. Marcus's mother sat in the gallery already, posture straight, expression satisfied. She gave me a polite smile, the kind reserved for someone already defeated. I returned it calmly. Judge Harriet Collins entered promptly at 9. Everyone stood. The proceedings began efficiently. Divorce hearings rarely carry drama unless someone creates it, and Marcus clearly expected everything to move quickly. Thomas presented the agreement first. My client, Marcus Hale, will assume all marital assets, including the family residence, Hale Development Group, and all associated property and vehicles. Rachel followed. My client, Olivia Carter, relinquishes claim to those assets and accepts the negotiated settlement. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at me. Mrs. Carter, do you understand that you are giving up claim to substantial marital property? Yes, Your Honor. And you are doing so voluntarily? Yes. She studied me carefully, searching for hesitation. There was none. Satisfied, she nodded for the documents to be distributed. Page after page moved across the table. Marcus signed quickly, barely pausing between signatures. His pen moved confidently, the way it always had when closing deals. He didn't read closely. He didn't need to. Or at least, he believed he didn't. I signed slowly, not hesitating, just deliberate. Each signature marked the end of waiting. Across the table, Thomas reviewed the documents one last time, flipping pages carefully. Then he reached the addendum. I watched his expression change. Confusion first, then concern. He turned back a page, then forward again, rereading numbers more carefully. Thomas leaned toward Marcus and whispered something urgently. Marcus waved him off with a small smile. Later, he muttered. Thomas whispered again, sharper this time. Marcus frowned and finally looked down at the document. I saw the exact moment understanding began. His eyes slowed. His posture stiffened. Color drained from his face. He flipped through pages quickly now. Mortgage balances, loan disclosures, personal guarantees tied directly to the assets he had just claimed. The room grew very quiet. This isn't right, Marcus said under his breath. Judge Collins looked up. Mr. Hale? He stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly across the floor. These numbers are wrong, he said, voice tightening. There's been a mistake. Rachel remained perfectly still beside me. Thomas cleared his throat carefully. Your Honor, the liability disclosures are attached to the asset agreement. The judge reviewed the documents calmly before looking back at Marcus. Mr. Hale, are you stating you were unaware of the financial obligations connected to assets in your own name? Silence filled the courtroom. For the first time since I had known him, Marcus Hale had no confident answer. And in that silence, reality finally reached him. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Marcus stood beside the table, papers trembling slightly in his hands as he flipped through them again and again, as if repetition might change the numbers printed in black ink. This can't be right, he said louder now. There's something missing. Judge Harriet Collins watched him calmly. Mr. Hale, please sit down. He hesitated before lowering himself into the chair, confusion quickly turning into panic. Thomas Reed leaned closer, speaking quietly but firmly, pointing toward specific paragraphs. The liabilities are disclosed here, Thomas said. They're attached to the asset transfer. Marcus shook his head. She hid this, he insisted, gesturing toward me. This isn't what I agreed to. For the first time that morning, I spoke. I didn't hide anything, I said evenly. You asked for the assets. The financial disclosures were included. The judge reviewed the documents again, then looked directly at Marcus. You were represented by counsel, she said. Were you advised to conduct an independent financial review? Thomas slowly produced a signed waiver. Marcus stared at it, recognition dawning. Another document he had signed without reading. Yes, he admitted quietly. Then you accepted these terms voluntarily, Judge Collins replied. The agreement stands. The gavel struck once. Clear, final. In accordance with the signed settlement, Mrs. Carter receives the agreed payment. Mr. Hale assumes all marital assets and all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. 15 years ended in seconds. Marcus turned toward me, disbelief replacing anger. You knew, he whispered. I met his eyes calmly. I understood our finances, I said. You wanted everything. I gave you exactly that. There was no triumph in my voice, only certainty. I gathered my bag and walked toward the exit. Behind me, Marcus's voice rose as he argued with Thomas, demanding explanations that no longer mattered. "I told you to review the audit," Thomas said quietly. "You declined." Outside the courtroom, Lena stood waiting. Her smile faded immediately as Marcus approached, words spilling out about debts, loans, misunderstandings. Understanding crossed her face quickly. Illusions rarely survive paperwork. By the time I reached the elevator, she was already stepping away from him. Some people fall in love with success. Very few stay for consequences. Outside, the Chicago air felt warmer than I expected. I inhaled deeply, feeling something lift from my chest. Not victory, but relief. The collapse came faster than anyone predicted. Within weeks, Lena moved out of the house. Attempts to sell the property failed once buyers learned about the mortgages. Creditors called constantly. Projects stalled. Bank accounts froze. 3 months later, Marcus filed for bankruptcy protection. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. I felt nothing. At home, life became quieter and steadier. Noah adjusted quickly, laughter returning to evenings again. One night, he looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You waited, didn't you? You knew this would happen." "I just wanted to make sure you were safe," I told him. The trust remained untouched, his future secure. Mine finally open. I enrolled in interior design classes, a dream I had postponed years earlier while helping Marcus build his company. My first client came through a neighbor, then another through recommendation. Small beginnings, honest ones. Months later, Marcus appeared at my apartment door. He looked thinner, older, stripped of certainty. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said quietly. "Maybe we could talk, figure something out." I understood what he meant. Help. I shook my head gently. "You wanted everything except Noah," I said. "You got exactly that." I closed the door softly. That night, sitting in my small living room, I looked around at furniture chosen by me. Walls painted colors I loved, a life built without pretending. My grandmother had been right. Keep something that belongs to you. Know your worth. And never confuse silence with weakness. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from letting someone carry the weight they insisted on taking. And if you followed this journey from the beginning, you already know. The quiet choices people overlook are often the ones that shape everything that comes next.